Let me tell you something that will make most people uncomfortable, especially if you're approaching retirement or already there. The biggest financial mistake you can make at 65 isn't running out of money. It's thinking the game is over. I've watched thousands of people make this error over 7 decades, and it's heartbreaking every single time. They reach retirement, they stop saving, they stop thinking, and they start what I call financial hibernation. They treat their nest egg like it's some kind of finish line trophy instead of what it actually is: a machine that needs constant maintenance, protection, and yes, continued feeding. That's the first and most dangerous delusion of retirement planning. The idea that you cross some imaginary line at 65 and suddenly the rules of mathematics, inflation, and human longevity stop applying to you. They don't. If anything, they become more brutal. Before we continue, if you want to avoid the mistakes I'm about to expose, mistakes that could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars and decades of financial security, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. What I'm going to share isn't feel-good retirement fantasy. It's the uncomfortable arithmetic that separates people who maintain dignity and independence in their 80s and 90s from those who become financial burdens on their children. Now, let me address the fundamental error in thinking here. Most people approach retirement with what I call the spending account mentality. They've saved their whole lives, they hit 65, and they think their job is done. Time to enjoy it all, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. And here's why. The mathematics of longevity have changed dramatically, but human behavior hasn't caught up. When Social Security was created in 1935, the average American male lived to about 60. The system was designed for people to work until 65 and collect benefits for maybe a few years before dying. That was the actuarial bet, and it was a good one for the government. Today, a 65-year-old couple has a 50% chance that at least one of them will live past 90. Think about that. 25 years. That's not a vacation. That's another quarter-century of inflation, healthcare costs, market volatility, and compound interest working either for you or against you. But here's what makes people uncomfortable. If you stop saving at 65 and just start drawing down your assets, you're betting everything on a single assumption. That assumption is that your money will last as long as you do. And I've watched that bet fail more times than I can count. Let me give you the numbers that nobody wants to talk about. Let's say you retire at 65 with $1 million. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? The conventional wisdom says you can withdraw 4% per year, adjusted for inflation. That's $40,000 the first year. Fine. But inflation over the past 70 years has averaged about 3% annually. Sometimes less, sometimes a hell of a lot more. In 20 years, at 3% inflation, your $40,000 of purchasing power needs to be about $72,000 in nominal terms just to buy the same basket of goods. Now, here's where people get crushed. They stop contributing to their savings at 65. They think the compound interest machine is working for them, but they forget that they're also withdrawing from it every single year. It's like trying to fill a bathtub while the drain is open. And that drain gets bigger every year because of inflation. The mathematics are brutal. If you withdraw 4% and inflation is 3%, you're counting on 7% real returns just to stay even. Some years, you'll get it. Some years, you won't. And the sequence of returns matters enormously, something most people don't understand until it's too late. Here's something that separates people who thrive in retirement from those who merely survive. The wealthy never stop being savers. Never. I'm 99 years old, and I'm still thinking about capital allocation every single day. Not because I need the money, because it's the right mental habit. Because the discipline of saving, of delayed gratification, of thinking in terms of purchasing power rather than nominal dollars, that discipline is what keeps you sharp. It's what keeps you from making catastrophic mistakes. And it's what ensures that your resources continue to grow even as you're using them. Let me tell you about the opportunity cost that nobody calculates. When you stop saving at 65, you're not just missing out on the contributions themselves. You're missing out on 20 or 30 years of compound interest on those contributions. Let's run the numbers. Say you're comfortable enough at 65 that you could save an additional $500 per month. That's $6,000 a year. Most people would say, "Why bother? I've already saved enough. Time to enjoy life." But watch what happens. $6,000 per year, invested at 8% annual returns, which is below the long-term stock market average, becomes over $340,000 in 20 years. In 30 years, over $700,000. Now, you might say, "But I'm withdrawing money, not adding to it." And that's precisely the point. If you can afford to save even a modest amount during the early years of retirement, you're creating a buffer. You're building margin of safety. You're ensuring that when you're 85 and your health care costs spike, or when you need assisted living, or when you want to help a grandchild with college, you have options. People who stop saving at 65 often find themselves at 85 with no options. Just declining resources and rising needs. That's not retirement. That's a slow-motion financial crisis. Here's what most people miss about the psychology of retirement saving. They think of it as deprivation. I've sacrificed my whole life, and now I'm supposed to keep sacrificing? That's the wrong frame entirely. Continuing to save in retirement isn't sacrifice. It's insurance. It's buying freedom. It's ensuring that you'll never be a burden. And here's the thing that really matters. For most people, the marginal utility of consumption decreases as you age. The difference between spending $80,000 a year and $90,000 a year in your 70s is much less significant than having an extra $200,000 in your 80s when you might need full-time care. This is where inversion becomes crucial. Don't ask, "How much can I spend in retirement?" Ask instead, "What's the worst-case scenario and how do I protect against it?" The worst case isn't dying with money in the bank. The worst case is living to 95 and running out of money at 85. I've watched people in that situation. It's devastating. Not just financially, but psychologically. The indignity of dependence, the stress on family relationships, the constant anxiety about every dollar spent, that's what you're protecting against when you continue to save. And since we're talking about intelligent decisions, if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. The principles I'm sharing aren't just theory. They're derived from watching thousands of people navigate retirement over 7 decades. Some do it brilliantly. Most do it poorly. The difference is usually a handful of mental models, applied consistently. Subscribe now if you want to be in the first group. Now, here's what makes people uncomfortable about continued saving in retirement. It requires admitting uncertainty. It requires acknowledging that you don't know how long you'll live, what health care will cost, what inflation will do, or what the markets will deliver. Most people want certainty. They want someone to tell them, "You need X dollars, and once you have it, you're done." But that's not how the world works. The future is fundamentally uncertain, and the right response to uncertainty is flexibility and margin of safety, not rigid plans based on optimistic assumptions. Let me give you a framework I've used my whole life. Think of your retirement assets in 3 buckets. The first bucket is your survival money. This is the amount that covers your basic needs: housing, food, health care, essential utilities. This money should be in the most secure, liquid assets possible: treasury bonds, money market funds, Maybe some high-grade municipal bonds if you're in a high-tax bracket. The second bucket is your longevity money. This is the amount that needs to grow to offset inflation and provide for your needs if you live well into your 90s. This should be in stocks, real estate, assets with real growth potential. The third bucket is your legacy money. This is what you want to leave behind or use for extraordinary circumstances. Here's the critical point. Even if you're withdrawing from bucket 1 and bucket 2 to fund your retirement, you should be feeding bucket 3 whenever possible. Why? Because it changes your psychology. It keeps you engaged with the idea of accumulation, not just consumption. It ensures that you're always thinking about long-term value, not just short-term spending. And practically, it provides options. If bucket 1 or bucket 2 gets depleted faster than expected, bucket 3 becomes your safety valve. I've watched this pattern for 7 decades, and I'll tell you exactly what happens to people who stop saving at 65. The first 5 years are usually fine, maybe even great. They're healthy, they're active, they've got pent-up desires from decades of work, and they spend freely. But around year 7 or 8, something changes. They start doing the math. They realize they've been drawing down assets faster than expected. Healthcare costs are higher than projected. Maybe they've helped kids or grandkids more than planned. And they start to feel that creeping anxiety, that sense that maybe the money won't last. By year 10 or 12, if they're still healthy and active, the anxiety often becomes acute. They start cutting back, but not intelligently, not strategically, just reactively. No more dinners out, no more travel, no more gifts to grandchildren. And here's the tragedy. They often have plenty of money left. But because they stopped thinking like accumulators, stopped maintaining that mental discipline, they've lost the ability to distinguish between wise frugality and penny-wise, pound-foolish anxiety. Contrast that with people who maintain the saving habit, even modestly, through retirement. They're making the same calculations, but with a different baseline. They're not asking, "Am I running out?" They're asking, "Am I optimizing?" They're still engaged with their investments, still thinking about allocation, still looking for value. And critically, they're still experiencing the psychological satisfaction of seeing their assets grow, not just shrink. That psychological element matters more than most people realize. The slow drip of watching your net worth decline, year after year, even if it's planned and sustainable, wears on people. It creates stress, anxiety, and often leads to poor decisions. Now, let me address the elephant in the room. Some of you are thinking, "This is fine for wealthy people, but I'm not wealthy. I can barely afford to stop working at 65. How am I supposed to keep saving?" And I understand that objection. But here's what you need to understand. The principle scales. If you can only save $50 a month, save $50 a month. The mathematics work the same way. $50 a month for 20 years at 8% is over $29,000. That might not sound like much, but when you're 85 and need a new roof or a medical procedure, $29,000 is the difference between security and crisis. And here's the thing about human behavior. The amount matters less than the habit. When you maintain the habit of saving, even small amounts, you maintain the mental discipline. You stay engaged with your finances. You keep thinking in terms of growth and accumulation rather than just depletion. That mental state is protective. It keeps you from making impulsive, destructive financial decisions. It keeps you focused on long-term value rather than short-term consumption. Let me talk about something most financial advisors won't tell you, because it's uncomfortable and doesn't fit the standard retirement narrative. The spending patterns in retirement typically follow a curve. People spend more in their late 60s and early 70s when they're active and healthy. Spending actually decreases in the mid to late 70s as activity levels naturally decline. Then it spikes again in the late 80s and 90s as healthcare needs increase. But here's what's crucial. That final spike is often the most expensive period of all. Full-time care, whether at home or in a facility, can easily cost $70,000 to $100,000 per year, and that's in today's dollars. In 20 or 30 years, it could be double that. If you stopped saving at 65 and have been drawing down assets for 20 years, you hit that final expensive period with depleted resources. But if you continued saving, even modestly, during those lower spending years in your 70s, you've built exactly the cushion you need for those high-expense years. The mathematics are straightforward. The execution requires discipline and a willingness to think differently than most people. Here's a mental model that served me well. Think of retirement not as a period of life, but as a series of distinct phases, each with different financial characteristics. Early retirement, roughly 65 to 75, typically active, healthy, higher discretionary spending. Middle retirement, 75 to 85, usually lower activity, declining discretionary spending, rising healthcare costs. Late retirement, 85 plus, potentially very high healthcare and care costs, limited ability to recover from financial mistakes. Each phase requires different strategies, different allocations, different thinking. The mistake most people make is treating all of retirement as a single homogeneous period. They calculate a safe withdrawal rate based on 30 years and call it done. But that's not how life works. Your expenses at 65 are different from your expenses at 85. Your risk tolerance is different. Your time horizon is different. Your ability to recover from mistakes is different. And critically, your opportunities to save are different. In early retirement, if you're healthy and your basic needs are met, you often have surplus capacity. Use it. Build reserves. Create margin. I'll say it again because it needs repeating. The purpose of saving in retirement isn't to die with the most money. It's to ensure you never run out while you're living. Those are related but distinct goals, and most people confuse them. You can be on track to die with plenty of money, but still run out of money if you live longer than expected or face unexpected expenses. The solution isn't complex mathematics, it's margin of safety. It's maintaining habits that create buffers and options. Let me give you the mathematics of inflation in retirement, because this is where most people get crushed and don't even realize it until it's too late. Let's say you retire with adequate resources to maintain your lifestyle at 65. Your annual expenses are $60,000, and you've got enough assets to withdraw that amount indefinitely at a 4% rate. You're comfortable. But inflation, even modest inflation, is corrosive. At 3% annual inflation, which is below the long-term average, your $60,000 of purchasing power becomes about $97,000 in nominal terms 20 years later. Your expenses haven't changed in real terms. You're not living more lavishly. You're just maintaining the same lifestyle, but you need 62% more dollars to do it. Now, if your assets are growing to offset that inflation, fine. But if you stopped saving and you're just drawing down, you're in a race. A race between your asset growth and the combination of inflation plus your withdrawals. And here's what makes it brutal. If you hit a bad sequence of returns early in retirement, a few years where the market drops just as you're making withdrawals, you can enter what's called a death spiral. Your portfolio shrinks, your withdrawals as a percentage of the remaining portfolio increase, and you never recover even when markets eventually rebound. I've watched this happen to intelligent people who did everything right except account for sequence risk. The solution is conceptually simple but behaviorally difficult. Keep feeding the machine. Even small additions during those early retirement years when you can afford them provide enormous protection against sequence risk. They give your portfolio breathing room. They reduce the withdrawal rate as a percentage of total assets. And they create psychological momentum. Instead of watching your net worth decline every year, you're watching it fluctuate, but with a generally upward bias. That changes everything about how you feel and how you make decisions. Here's a test I give people when they're planning retirement. I ask them to imagine they're 90 years old, looking back on their financial decisions from 65 onward. Would their 90-year-old self thank them for spending an extra $5,000 a year on discretionary consumption in their late 60s? Or would that 90-year-old self thank them for saving an extra $5,000 a year, which is now compounded into a significant cushion? The answer is almost always the latter. But here's the problem. People answer that question correctly when posed abstractly, but they don't act on it. They know intellectually what they should do, but the behavioral pull to consume is stronger than the rational calculation of future value. This is where mental models become protective. One model I've used my whole life is what I call the independence test. Before making any significant financial decision, ask yourself, does this decision increase or decrease my independence? Does it expand or contract my options? Does it make me more or less vulnerable to circumstances beyond my control? If you apply that test consistently, the right decisions become obvious. Spending down your assets without continuing to save decreases independence. It contracts options. It makes you more vulnerable. Maintaining the saving habit, even modestly, does the opposite. Let me talk about the real enemy in retirement, the one that most people underestimate until it's destroyed them. Inflation. Not market crashes, not recessions, inflation. Because inflation is relentless and cumulative, and it never stops. A market crash is painful, but if you have time, markets recover. Inflation doesn't reverse. It compounds. And in retirement, you have decades for that compounding to work against you. At 3% inflation, prices double every 24 years. At 4%, every 18 years. If you retire at 65 and live to 95, that's 30 years. At 3% inflation, prices increase by more than 2.5 times. The coffee that costs $3 at 65 costs $7.50 at 95. The healthcare premium that costs $500 a month costs over $1,200. Now, Social Security adjusts for inflation, imperfectly, but it adjusts. But your savings? They only keep pace with inflation if they're invested appropriately, and if you're not drawing them down faster than they're growing. And here's the brutal truth. Most people entering retirement are too conservatively invested. They move heavily into bonds and cash equivalents because they're afraid of market volatility. But in doing so, they guarantee that they'll lose to inflation. Bonds and cash might preserve nominal value, but they destroy real purchasing power over time. You're choosing the certainty of slow decline over the possibility of volatility with growth. That's a bad trade if you've got a 20 or 30-year time horizon. The right allocation in retirement is more aggressive than most people think. Especially in your early retirement years, you should have significant equity exposure, real assets, things that can grow and keep pace with or exceed inflation. Yes, there will be volatility, but volatility isn't the same as risk. Risk is running out of money. Risk is losing purchasing power. Risk is becoming dependent. Market fluctuations are just noise if your time horizon is measured in decades. And if you're continuing to save, even modestly, market declines become opportunities, not threats. You're buying assets at lower prices, which enhances future returns. I want to address something that's particularly important for couples. The statistics on spousal longevity are sobering. For a 65-year-old couple, there's about a 75% chance that at least one of them lives past 85. About 50% chance one lives past 90. About 25% chance one lives past 95. Think about what that means. If you're married and you both retire at 65, you need to plan for potentially 30 years of expenses. And typically, the surviving spouse is the wife, statistically speaking. Women live longer than men on average, so you're often planning for a woman in her late 80s or 90s trying to manage resources alone. If you stopped saving at 65 and have been drawing down for 25 years, and then one spouse dies, the surviving spouse is often in a precarious position. Reduced income, often higher per capita expenses, potentially depleted resources, and limited ability to recover. But if you continued saving during those early retirement years, built buffers, maintained margin, the surviving spouse has security, has options, has independence. That's what you're really saving for. Not abstract wealth. Concrete security for the people you love in their most vulnerable years. Here's what separates people who build lasting wealth from those who merely consume it. They understand the difference between nominal and real, between feeling rich and being secure, between lifestyle and life quality. You can have a lavish lifestyle in your late 60s and find yourself anxious and insecure in your late 80s. Or you can maintain modest discipline through your retirement years and have genuine security and peace of mind in extreme old age. Those are choices. And they're made incrementally year after year, in thousands of small decisions about consumption versus saving. Let me give you 5 questions to ask yourself right now, whether you're already retired or planning to retire soon. First question, what's my actual life expectancy? Not the average, but the realistic range given my health, genetics, and lifestyle. If you're healthy and you've got longevity in your family, you need to plan for 95, maybe 100. That's not being pessimistic. That's being realistic. Second question, what will inflation likely do to my purchasing power over the next 20 to 30 years? Not what I hope it will do. What's realistic based on history? Third question, what's my current withdrawal rate as a percentage of my assets? And how does that rate change if I live longer than expected or face higher than expected expenses? Fourth question, am I truly diversified in ways that protect against the real risks I face, which are inflation, longevity, and healthcare costs? Or am I diversified in ways that make me feel comfortable but don't actually address real risk? And fifth question, the most important one, if I continue my current spending and saving patterns for 20 years, will my 90-year-old self thank me or resent me? Be honest. Because that future self is who you're really making decisions for, whether you acknowledge it or not. Now, let me be clear about something. I'm not advocating miserliness. I'm not suggesting you deprive yourself of reasonable enjoyment in retirement. What I'm advocating is intentionality, consciousness, the understanding that every dollar you spend is a dollar that's not compounding for your future security. That doesn't mean you shouldn't spend it. It means you should spend it wisely, with full awareness of the trade-offs. Take the trip to see your grandchildren. That's not just consumption. That's investment in relationships and experiences that provide enduring value. Buy the upgraded healthcare plan that gives you peace of mind. That's not wasteful spending. That's buying security and potentially better health outcomes, which have enormous economic value. But the new luxury car every 3 years? The timeshare you'll use twice? The country club membership you maintain for status rather than genuine use? Those are consumption patterns that don't provide proportional value and that undermine your long-term security. The difference between wise spending and wasteful spending isn't about the amount. It's about the return on investment, broadly defined. And one of the best investments you can make in retirement is continued saving, because it buys you the most valuable thing there is: options and independence. Here's something I've learned over 7 decades. The quality of your decisions is determined more by your mental models and behavioral discipline than by your intelligence or education. I've known brilliant people who made catastrophic financial decisions in retirement because they lacked the right mental frameworks. And I've known people of average intelligence who thrived because they had simple, robust principles and the discipline to apply them consistently. Continued saving in retirement is one of those principles. It's not intellectually complex. It doesn't require sophisticated financial knowledge. It just requires discipline and the willingness to defer gratification for genuine security. Let me tell you what Warren and I learned building Berkshire over 6 decades. We learned that the accumulation never really stops. Not because we're greedy, but because we understand that capital is a tool, and tools need to be maintained and sharpened. Your retirement capital is the tool that provides your lifestyle. If you're only using it and never maintaining it, it will eventually fail. And unlike a physical tool, when your financial tool fails, you can't just buy a new one. You're done. So you maintain it. You feed it. You protect it. Even as you're using it. The mechanism is straightforward. During your early retirement years, when your health is good and your expenses are discretionary, you live below your means and save the difference. Not all of it, not even most of it, but some of it, even if it's just 10% of your retirement income. That discipline serves multiple purposes. It maintains your mental habits. It builds buffers. It provides margin against uncertainty. And crucially, it shifts your baseline expectations. If you're living on 90% of your retirement income from the start, and that feels normal and comfortable, you're not experiencing deprivation. You're experiencing security. But if you live on 100% and then need to cut back later because you're running short, that feels like deprivation, even if the actual lifestyle is identical. This is pure behavioral economics. The same standard of living feels completely different depending on whether you're experiencing it as normal or as a step down. So set your baseline thoughtfully from the beginning of retirement. Live well, but not at the absolute maximum of what you can afford. Create that margin deliberately, and use part of it for continued saving. Your 85-year-old self will thank you profusely. Now, here's where people often object. They say, "But the money is finite. Eventually, I'll have to start drawing it down." So, what's the difference between starting that drawdown at 65 versus starting it at 70 or 75? And the answer is time. Compounding. Margin. If you save an additional $50,000 in your late 60s and early 70s, and that money compounds at 8% for 15 or 20 years, it becomes $150,000 to $200,000 of additional resources when you're in your mid to late 80s. That's potentially 2 or 3 years of expensive care fully paid for. That's independence. That's dignity. That's the difference between options and dependence. And here's what's crucial. Those savings during your late 60s and early 70s often come from the most discretionary spending categories. The marginal trips, the upgraded this or that, the nice-to-haves that don't really enhance life quality proportionally to their cost. You're not sacrificing necessities. You're not even sacrificing most enjoyment. You're just being selective, intentional, and that intentionality pays enormous dividends later. If you take nothing else from this, take this. Retirement isn't the end of the financial journey. It's a transition to a different phase, a phase that requires different strategies, but the same fundamental disciplines that built your wealth in the first place. I'm 99 years old, and I've spent most of that time watching people make predictable mistakes with their retirement resources. Not because they're stupid, but because they fundamentally misunderstand what retirement is. They think it's a period of life where the normal rules don't apply, where you can stop being disciplined, stop being intentional, stop being thoughtful about resources, but the rules don't change. The mathematics don't care that you're retired. The antidote isn't complex. It's not about sophisticated strategies or cutting-edge financial products. It's about maintaining the fundamental disciplines that created wealth in the first place. Living below your means, saving consistently, thinking in terms of real purchasing power rather than nominal dollars, maintaining margin of safety, and staying engaged with your financial life. Those principles are as valid at 75 as they were at 35. Maybe more so, because the margin for error is smaller. Warren and I built Berkshire by never stopping the accumulation process, by treating capital as a tool that needed constant attention and feeding, by thinking in decades rather than quarters, and by maintaining discipline through every market cycle. You can do the same thing on a smaller scale. You can maintain the saving habit through retirement. You can keep your capital working and growing even as you're drawing on it for living expenses. You can build the margin and options that ensure you'll never become dependent or lose your dignity. The choice is yours. You can follow the conventional path, stop saving at 65, slowly draw down your assets, and hope the mathematics work out in your favor, feeling secure in those early retirement years, while the slow erosion of inflation and withdrawals undermines your foundation. Or you can maintain discipline, continue saving even modestly, build buffers and margin, and ensure that your most vulnerable years are also your most secure years. One feels easier now, one is safer later. They're not the same thing. And here's what matters. The decision you make at 65 about whether to continue saving will echo through the next 3 decades of your life. It will determine whether you're comfortable and independent at 90 or anxious and dependent, whether you have options or are at the mercy of circumstance, whether your children inherit your values and discipline or inherit the burden of your care. That's what's at stake. Not whether you have a slightly nicer car or take one more vacation, but whether you maintain independence and dignity through your entire life. If this video changed your perspective on retirement savings, show it. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who's approaching retirement or already retired and needs to hear this truth. The conventional retirement narrative is failing millions of people. It's time to spread a different message, one based on mathematical reality rather than wishful thinking. See you in the next video.